It was 12:17 a.m. The only light in my small Austin apartment came from the blue glow of my laptop screen. I was hunched over a spreadsheet. Not for my own job, but for his. Caleb had a quarterly review coming up, and he'd casually mentioned that he didn't have time to organize the sales data. So, here I was after a full day at my own data analyst job, doing his. The coffee beside me was cold. My eyes burned from staring at the tiny, unforgiving numbers. I was tired, a deep, bone-heavy tired that had become my new normal. I was just finishing the last column when my phone buzzed on the table. A short, sharp vibration that cut through the silence. I felt a familiar little jump in my chest, the one I always got when he messaged me late. It was a mix of relief that he was thinking of me and a knot of anxiety about what his mood might be. I reached for the phone, a small smile already on my lips. I imagined his text would say, "Thank you. You're a lifesaver." Or maybe, "Just got home. Thinking of you." Simple things. The kinds of things that made the late nights and the cold coffee feel worth it. The screen lit up with his name, Caleb Sterling, and then the message. "You're clingy and pathetic. I need space from your neediness." The words didn't register at first. I read them once, then twice. My brain tried to find another meaning. A joke I wasn't getting. A typo that changed everything. But there was no joke. The words were simple, clean, and brutal. They just sat there glowing on the screen. Clingy. The word echoed in the quiet room. Was that what this was? Me finishing his work while he was out with his colleagues was clingy? Me remembering his mother's birthday and buying the gift he forgot was pathetic? Me making sure he had clean shirts for his business trips and a stocked fridge when he came home was neediness? My heart started to pound. A frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. For 2.5 years, my life had been carefully arranged around his. My schedule, my energy, my emotions, they were all tied to him. I was his rock. He'd always said, "A rock doesn't need anything. A rock just sits there, solid and dependable, while you build your life on top of it. But a rock can be shattered." My first instinct was to defend myself. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type out a furious, tear-filled novel. "How dare you, after everything I do for you? I am the least needy person you know. I give and I give and I give and I ask for nothing." Then came the second instinct, the one that felt even more familiar. The urge to apologize, to shrink myself. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I was being too much. How can I fix this? What do you need?" I could feel the hot tears welling in my eyes. I could feel the sob building in my throat, the one that would leave me gasping for air. I could already picture the next 24 hours, me begging, him growing colder, me crying, him telling me my tears were manipulative, me promising to be better, to be less, to take up less space, and him sighing, granting me his forgiveness like a king bestowing a favor upon a peasant. I had played out that scene in smaller ways 100 times before. But tonight, something was different. Staring at the word pathetic, something inside me went very, very still. It was the stillness of a lake right before a storm. A quiet that was more powerful than any noise. He didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a burden. All the love I thought I was giving, he received as weight. I took a deep, shaky breath. The tears were still there, but they didn't fall. My thumbs, which had been trembling, became steady. I would not beg. I would not cry. I would not ask for an explanation. He had told me what he needed. He needed space from my neediness. So, I would give it to him. I typed back a single word, okay. My finger paused over the send button. It was the point of no return. But there was nothing to return to. The home I thought I had built with him was just a house of cards. And he had just blown it down with a single breath. I pressed send. The little blue bubble appeared on the screen. A quiet confirmation. I didn't wait for his reply. I didn't wonder what he would think. I held down the power button on the side of my phone until the screen went black. The sudden darkness was a relief. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was mine. For the first time in 2.5 years, my silence would have to speak for me. And I had a feeling it would be louder than my words ever were. When I met Caleb, it was at a tech conference in downtown Austin. He wasn't a speaker, just an attendee like me. But he moved through the crowded convention center like he owned it. He had that kind of energy. A magnetic pull that made you want to be closer to see if some of his light would reflect onto you. He was handsome in a sharp, clean-cut way, with a smile that seemed to disarm everyone it landed on. He talked about his startup with a passion that was intoxicating. He wanted to change the world. I just wanted to make sure my data models were accurate. I was the quiet one in the corner. The person who preferred observing to participating. My life was built on stability. I had a good job, a cozy apartment, a predictable routine. I found comfort in order, in things that made sense. My world was black and white, a landscape of logical conclusions. Caleb was a burst of color. He noticed me when I asked a speaker a particularly detailed question about server-side processing. After the panel, he came over, that brilliant smile already in place. "That was a killer question," he said. "You actually know what you're talking about." It felt like a compliment, but looking back, I see it for what it was: surprise. Surprise that the quiet woman in the gray blazer had a brain. Our first few dates were a whirlwind. He took me to fancy restaurants I couldn't afford and rooftop bars with glittering views of the city. He talked about his dreams, his 5-year plan, his vision for the future. I mostly listened, captivated. He made my stable life feel small, boring. He was the main character, and I was happy just to be in the story. The shift was subtle. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, quiet erosion of my own life, replaced piece by piece with his. It started with small things. He'd call me in a panic on his way to a meeting with investors. "Maya, Can you just look over my pitch deck one more time? You have such a good eye for detail. So, I'd drop what I was doing, open the file, and spend my lunch break correcting his typos and strengthening his financial projections. He'd text back, "You're my rock, Maya." And the thrill of being needed was enough. It felt like love. Soon, I was his unofficial, unpaid assistant. His laptop crashed a day before a major project was due. I stayed up with him until 3 a.m., talking to tech support, methodically backing up his files and getting his system running again. He fell asleep on the couch while I did the last of the work. The next morning, he kissed me on the forehead and said, "What would I do without you?" I didn't have an answer, and he didn't wait for one. I became the keeper of his life. I remembered his dentist appointments, his mother's birthday, the names of his clients' children. I was the one who noticed when he was running low on coffee and picked it up on my way home from work. I was the one who listened for hours as he vented about his co-founder, offering solutions he would later present as his own. I proofread his emails, organized his receipts for taxes, and calmed him down when his anxiety spiraled. My own needs, my own stresses, seemed so insignificant in comparison. When would I even bring them up? He was always in the middle of a crisis, always on the verge of a breakthrough. My simple desire to just have a quiet dinner and talk about my day felt selfish. My friends started to notice. "We never see you anymore, Maya," my best friend Sophie would say. "It's always about Caleb's schedule. He's just really busy right now." I'd reply, the excuse tasting like ash in my mouth. His startup is at a critical stage. But the startup was always at a critical stage. Being his rock meant I had to be perfectly still, perfectly strong. A rock doesn't have bad days. A rock doesn't get tired. A rock doesn't have its own dreams. Slowly, I started to feel myself sinking under the weight of his world. My hobbies faded away. I stopped going to my weekly yoga class because Caleb might need me. I stopped reading novels because my evenings were spent on his projects. My life, which had once been a carefully tended garden, was becoming a barren plot of land where only his ambitions could grow. He'd smile that brilliant smile, pull me close, and say, "You're my secret weapon. We're a team." But in a team, both players get to hold the ball. I was just the water girl running onto the field whenever he was thirsty, then retreating to the sidelines to watch him play the game. I had convinced myself that his success was my success. His happiness was my happiness. But as I sat in the dark, my phone powered off. The only thing I felt was the crushing weight of his life and the echoing emptiness of my own. I wasn't his rock. I was his shadow. And I was disappearing. That Thursday night felt like 100 other nights before it. Rain was streaking down the windows of my apartment, the city lights blurring into a watercolor painting of gray and gold. Inside, the air was thick with tension, and it all belonged to Caleb. He was pacing back and forth in my small living room, running a hand through his hair while he rehearsed the key points of his presentation. He had a huge meeting the next morning, a chance to land a new round of funding that could make or break his company. His career was on the line, which meant my life was on hold. I had been in support mode for 3 straight days. I'd done a full day of work at my own job. But the moment I walked through my door, my second shift began. I had spent hours refining his PowerPoint slides, turning his jumbled notes into a sleek, professional narrative. I'd made charts and graphs that made his projected growth look not just optimistic, but inevitable. I'd even researched the investors he was meeting, creating a small dossier on each one with their professional histories and personal interests so he could make a connection. "Okay, let's run the opening again," he said, his voice tight. He didn't look at me. He was staring at his reflection in the dark window. I sat on the couch, my laptop open, a bowl of untouched pasta growing cold on the coffee table. "Okay," I said, my voice soft, encouraging. From the top? "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In a market saturated with solutions, we offer a revolution." He stumbled through the lines, mixing up his words, his confidence faltering. I gently corrected him, offered a different phrasing, reminded him to slow down, to breathe. This was our dance. He would spiral with stress, and I would be the calm, steady center that pulled him back. Around 10, I saw him starting to fray. His shoulders were slumped, his energy depleted. I got up and went to the kitchen. I packed him a small dinner for the morning, a sandwich and some fruit, so he wouldn't have to think about it. I put a fresh bottle of water in his briefcase. I laid out his best suit on my bed, making sure the shirt was ironed perfectly. It was a series of small, invisible acts of service. It was the labor of love. I told myself, it was what you did for your partner. When I came back into the living room, he was staring at a slide, his jaw clenched. I decided it was a good time to bring up something for me, for us. It was something small, something I'd been looking forward to. "Hey," I started, trying to sound casual. "My friend Sophie's wedding is next Saturday. I was thinking we could make a weekend of it. It's out in the hill country. It'll be beautiful. We could use a break." He didn't even look up from his laptop. He just waved a dismissive hand. "Can't. I'll be swamped after this meeting." A familiar pang of disappointment hit me, but I pushed it down. "Oh, okay. Well, I still need to give her a final head count." "Are you sure? It would just be for the one night." I was already backtracking, already making my request smaller, more palatable. He finally turned his head, and his eyes were cold, distant. "Maya, I just told you I can't. Why do you always do this?" "Do what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "This pushing. You're always around. You're always here. It's suffocating." The word hit me like a physical blow. Suffocating. All my care, all my support, all my love. To him, it was just a lack of air. I stood there speechless, the neatly ironed shirt and the packed lunch feeling foolish and heavy in my mind. I was trying to hold him up, but he felt like he was drowning, I think he saw the hurt on my face, but it didn't soften him. It seemed to annoy him more. He stood up, his frustration finally boiling over. He wasn't just a man stressed about a meeting anymore. He was a cornered animal, and he was about to bite. And then he said the words that came just hours before the text message, the words that cracked my chest wide open. "You're clingy," he said, his voice low and sharp. "And honestly, it's pathetic." Pathetic? The room went silent except for the sound of the rain against the glass. He had taken all the love I had given him, all the nights I had stayed up, all the sacrifices I had made, and he had twisted them into something ugly, something shameful. He wasn't just dismissing my request to go to a wedding. He was dismissing my entire worth in our relationship. I was not his partner. I was a problem, an annoyance, a pathetic weight he had to drag around. In that moment, something inside me broke. But it wasn't a loud, messy, shattering. It was a clean, quiet snap. The invisible cord that had tied my well-being to his had just been severed. The fog of love and obligation cleared, and I saw him with perfect, brutal clarity. He wasn't a brilliant man under pressure. He was just a cruel boy who took whatever he could and blamed others for his own shortcomings. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. All the fight had gone out of me, replaced by a profound and hollow calm. I looked at him, my expression unreadable. I just whispered, "You'll have all the space you need." Then I turned, walked into my bedroom, and closed the door, leaving him alone with his presentation. The labor was over. The night after he left my apartment was long. I didn't sleep. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the word pathetic branded onto the back of my eyelids. The text message came a few hours later at 12:17 a.m. A final, cruel twist of the knife. But after the initial shock, after I typed OK and turned off my phone, a strange sense of peace settled over me. It was the calm of inevitability, the calm of knowing there was nothing left to save. The next morning, I woke up with a new kind of resolve. It wasn't angry or vengeful. It was quiet and methodical. It was the data analyst in me taking over. I had a problem, and I was going to implement a logical solution. The problem was that my presence, my love, and my effort were not valued. The solution was to remove them completely. I turned my phone back on, my heart giving a slight flutter of anxiety. There were no new messages from him. Of course not. In his mind, I had agreed to his terms. I was the obedient girlfriend, taking her punishment and waiting quietly until he decided he was ready to speak to me again. My first move was to change how I interacted with his digital existence. I thought about blocking his number, deleting his photos, unfriending him on social media. But those actions felt loud. They were a statement. A blocking message says, "You hurt me so much I can't even look at you." It was a reaction, and I was done reacting to him. Silence was different. Silence is a void. It's an absence where something used to be. It isn't an action. It's the removal of one. And it's far more unnerving. So, I didn't block him. I went into my phone settings and turned off my read receipts. He would see his messages as delivered, but he would never know if I had read them. He would be texting into a black hole. Then, I opened our message thread, that long history of my loving replies and his curt demands, and I archived it. I didn't delete it. I just moved it out of sight. Out of mind. I muted his number so my phone would no longer buzz with his name. I did the same on every social media app. I didn't unfriend him. I just chose to no longer see him. I had effectively erased him from my daily life without him even knowing it. My world was now a Caleb-free zone. But to him, the line of communication was still technically open. He was free to talk. He just wouldn't get a response. The first test came on Friday morning. A message popped up on my phone's locked screen. A banner at the top before it disappeared. Thanks for understanding. I was at my desk at work sipping my morning coffee. I saw the message and felt a bitter smile touch my lips. He thought he'd won. He thought this was me being good, giving him the space he needed, waiting for him to come back. He had no idea this was not a pause. This was a stop. I didn't open the message. I just cleared the notification and went back to my work. Saturday came and went. I went to Sophie's wedding alone. It was strange at first. Walking into the beautiful venue without him by my side. People asked where he was. He had to work. I said. The lie, simple and clean. For the first few hours, I felt his absence like a missing limb. But then something shifted. I danced with my friends. I laughed at the speeches. I drank champagne and didn't have to worry about being the designated driver. I didn't have to check on his mood or make sure he was having a good time. I only had to worry about myself. It was liberating. On Sunday night, another message appeared. You okay? The question was so transparent. He wasn't asking because he was concerned about my well-being. He was asking because my silence was starting to feel unusual. My pattern was to apologize, to check in, to smooth things over. My silence was a disruption to his system. He was checking on the status of his rock. I was at home reading a book I'd meant to start for months. I ignored the message. The real shift came on Tuesday. I was walking home from work, enjoying the warm evening air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Can you grow up and talk like an adult? I stopped on the sidewalk and stared at the screen. And then I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated irony. Him, the man who called his girlfriend pathetic in a late-night text, was telling me to grow up. The man who couldn't communicate his needs without cruelty was accusing me of not being an adult. The manipulation was so blatant, so clear now that I was no longer submerged in it. He was trying to provoke a reaction. Anger. Guilt, anything was better than the void. He wanted me to engage, to argue, so he could twist my words and make this my fault? I smiled at the screen. A real, genuine smile this time. It felt like a superpower. For the first time in years, I held all the cards. I wasn't the one anxiously waiting for a text. I wasn't the one wondering what I did wrong. He was. For the first time in our entire relationship, Caleb Sterling was the one left waiting, and I was the one who was free. The first week of my silence was about my own survival. The second week was when I started to see the ripple effects. My absence in his life wasn't just an emotional void. It was a logistical one. I had been the scaffolding holding up his entire structure. And without me, the walls were starting to crack. I didn't seek out the information. It just found its way to me in small pieces through the cracks of the life we used to share. On Wednesday, Sophie called me. "Weirdest thing," she said, her voice a mix of confusion and amusement. "I was driving down Lamar this morning and I saw Caleb on the side of the road. His precious BMW was on the shoulder with the hood up. Smoke pouring out of it. He was just standing there, staring at it like he'd never seen an engine before." I felt a sudden, sharp memory. Me on a Sunday afternoon 2 months ago, sitting in that same car with the owner's manual, Googling what the check engine light meant, and then booking the appointment with the mechanic he kept forgetting to call. I had even reminded him last week that his oil change was overdue. "Oh, really?" I said, my voice carefully neutral. A ghost of the old Maya wanted to feel a pang of worry, to text him and ask if he was okay, if he needed a ride. The old instinct to fix his problems was still there, but it was faint, like a distant echo. "Yeah. He looked so lost," Sophie continued. "Oblivious." I almost stopped. But then I remembered what a jerk he was for ditching you at my wedding. So I just drove by and waved. I laughed. A real, full laugh. "Good for you." When we hung up, I felt not a shred of guilt. It wasn't my car. It wasn't my problem. It was just a consequence. The next piece of news came from Daniel, a former colleague who was a mutual friend. He texted me on Friday. "Hey, is Caleb okay? Heard his investor meeting was a complete train wreck." My fingers froze over the phone. That was the meeting. The one I had prepped him for. The one that had been the catalyst for our final fight. I typed back, "We're not really talking right now. What happened?" Daniel's reply came instantly. "Dude, I don't know the details. But the rumor is his presentation was full of typos and the financial projections didn't add up. Someone said he completely fumbled a question about market scalability. Total disaster. Everyone's whispering that he's lost his focus." I closed my eyes. I could picture the slide deck perfectly in my mind. I remembered the exact slide where I had embedded the scalability data with clear, concise bullet points. I also remembered telling him he needed to memorize it because it was his weakest area. He clearly hadn't listened. He hadn't had me there to drill him on it for hours, to run lines with him until it was second nature. I felt a quiet, somber sense of validation. I hadn't been clingy. I had been essential. I wasn't pathetic. I was competent. All the work I had done, the work he took for granted, had been the very thing keeping his world from falling apart. His success hadn't been just his. It had been ours. But only he was getting the credit. While his world was quietly collapsing, Mine was beginning to bloom. The silence he had demanded was the most fertile ground I had ever known. With all the time and energy I used to pour into him, I started to invest in myself. On a whim, I signed up for a beginner's pottery class at a local studio. The first night, I was nervous. I was surrounded by strangers and I felt clumsy and awkward. But then I sat down at the wheel, and the instructor placed a lump of cold, wet clay in my hands. The moment my hands were covered in it, something shifted in me. The work was messy, unpredictable. It required complete focus. I couldn't think about Caleb. I couldn't worry about anything outside of the spinning wheel and the shape forming between my palms. My first pot was a lopsided, wobbly little bowl, but it was mine. I had made it with my own 2 hands. I hadn't fixed it for someone else. I had created it for myself. I started laughing with the woman at the wheel next to me when her pot completely collapsed. We were 2 strangers covered in mud, laughing until our sides hurt. It was the easiest, most uncomplicated human connection I had felt in years. That night, I went home and, for the first time since I could remember, I slept through the entire night. I didn't wake up at 2 a.m. with a jolt of anxiety, wondering if he was okay. I didn't check my phone the moment I opened my eyes. The space he had demanded was now my sanctuary. And in that quiet, peaceful space, I was finally beginning to find the person I had lost. I was finding me. The second week of silence felt different from the first. The initial sense of quiet empowerment began to settle into a new stable reality. My life was no longer defined by a state of waiting. Waiting for a text, for a mood swing, for the other shoe to drop. The silence I had created was now just my life. It was peaceful. I was thriving in it. For Caleb, it was clearly becoming a prison. His tone began to shift from angry and demanding to confused and desperate. The messages that I'd see flash on my screen before dismissing them were no longer commands. They were pleas. It started on a Monday, exactly 2 weeks after the night he'd called me pathetic. I was leaving my pottery class, my hands still smelling of damp earth, and my mind blissfully empty. I was thinking about the shape of the vase I'd almost managed to create, a little lopsided, but recognizably a vase. I felt a sense of accomplishment that was simple and pure. As I got to my car, my phone buzzed. I didn't mean pathetic. I stood in the parking lot and looked at the words. There was no apology. Not really. It was a retraction born of desperation. Not remorse. He didn't say, "I'm sorry for hurting you." He said, "I didn't mean it." He was trying to erase the cause because he didn't like the effect. A few months ago, those words would have been a lifeline. I would have clung to them, relieved that he was taking it back, willing to pretend along with him that the wound wasn't there. But now, the words were meaningless. He had meant them. He had felt them enough to type them out and hit send. What he didn't mean for was the consequence. This unwavering, absolute silence. I dismissed the notification and drove home. The satisfaction from my pottery class untarnished. A few days later, another one arrived. I was at a coffee shop with Sophie, talking about her new marriage. I was completely present, listening to her stories, laughing with her. I wasn't checking my phone, wasn't glancing at the door. My time was my own. When I pulled out my phone to pay, I saw his message. Please, Maya, talk to me. The please was what struck me. Caleb didn't use that word often, unless it was a preface to a huge ask. Please. Can you bail me out and finish this report for me? Please. Can you just handle my parents? I'm too stressed. It was a word he used to get something he wanted. Now, he wanted a response. He wanted a sign that his rock was still there, buried somewhere underneath this cold silence. He wasn't asking for my forgiveness. He was asking for my attention. He needed me to break the silence so he could feel in control again. I paid for my coffee and put the phone away. His desperation peaked at the end of the week. The messages started coming more frequently, sometimes several in a day. Voicemails I never listened to started to pile up. I was at home sketching out a design for a new set of bowls when the final message of the week came through. It was late, close to midnight. You're killing me with this silence. I put my pencil down and stared at the screen. The accusation was so familiar. So perfectly Caleb. He was in pain. So it had to be my fault. My silence was an action he could blame. It was an attack. He couldn't or wouldn't see that it was just a mirror. All the loneliness, all the frustration, all the helplessness he was feeling, it was a reflection of the world he had built for me. I thought about the countless nights I had lain awake in bed next to him, feeling utterly alone while he slept peacefully. I thought of the birthdays he barely acknowledged, the successes at my job he dismissed, the times I had been sick and he had treated my needs as an inconvenience. He had surrounded me with a silence of his own for years, an emotional silence, a profound neglect of my heart. I had lived in that quiet, lonely space, trying desperately to be heard. Now he was getting a small taste of it, and it was killing him. He was finally experiencing the loneliness he had so expertly crafted for me. But I wasn't doing it to him. I was just refusing to live in it with him anymore. My silence wasn't a weapon meant to kill him. It was the space I needed to finally breathe. I archived the message. His desperation was his to own. My peace was mine. When begging and pleading failed to get a response, Caleb's desperation curdled into something much darker. If he couldn't lure me back with feigned remorse, he would try to force me out of my silence with cruelty. He had tried to break my heart. Now he would try to break my life. It was the third week of my silence, and I was about to find out just how low he would go. The first attack was aimed at my career, the very foundation of the stability I had worked so hard to build. I was called into a meeting with my department head and a woman from Human Resources. My stomach immediately clenched with a cold. Professional dread. These were not meetings you got called into for a pat on the back. Maya, thanks for coming in. My boss, Arthur, said, his expression unreadable. The HR manager, a woman named Ms. Patel, gave me a tight, professional smile. We received an anonymous email concerning you. Ms. Patel began, getting straight to the point. Given the nature of the claims, We are obligated to discuss it with you. She turned her monitor toward me. The email was a block of text without a signature. It was full of carefully chosen words designed to destroy my reputation. It claimed I had become erratic and emotionally unstable over the past several weeks. It suggested I was a liability, prone to dramatic outbursts and unable to handle stress. It was a portrait of a hysterical woman, painted by a coward's hand. But I knew the artist. Every word reeked of Caleb. He was taking my quiet strength and twisting it into a narrative of madness. My first feeling was a surge of hot, white anger. He was trying to poison the one place where I felt competent and respected. He was trying to take my livelihood. But then the anger receded, and the calm I had been cultivating for weeks took its place. Panicking was what he wanted. Breaking down was what he expected. I took a slow breath. "I see," I said, my voice steady. "This is baseless." It's also not anonymous. I am certain this was sent by my ex-boyfriend, Caleb Sterling, from whom I have been estranged for the past 3 weeks. "Ms. Patel raised an eyebrow. "What makes you so sure?" "Because this is a tactic," I explained calmly. "He is upset that I have stopped communicating with him, and this is his way of trying to force a reaction." I paused, then made a decision. I pulled out my phone. "I can show you why I stopped communicating with him, if that would provide context." I opened the archived message thread and showed them the last texts, his calling me clingy and pathetic, and mine. The single word, "Okay." I showed them the stream of increasingly desperate and manipulative messages he had sent since, all unanswered. I watched Ms. Patel's face change as she read. Her professional mask softened into something like sympathy. Arthur just looked disgusted. "This email is a form of harassment. Maya," Ms. Patel said gently. "It's clear what's happening here. Please don't worry. We will be disregarding this completely and adding it to an internal file. We have your back." I walked out of that office feeling taller. His attempt to hurt me had backfired. He had tried to paint me as unstable, but all he'd done was expose his own vindictiveness. My evidence-based, calm approach had won. My career wasn't just safe. It was reinforced by the support of my colleagues. His second attempt was more public and even more pathetic. A few days later, Sophie sent me a screenshot from his Instagram story. It was one of those text on a colored background posts, written in a font that tried to look profound. It read, "Be careful of people who use silence as a weapon. It's the most toxic form of emotional abuse. A mature person communicates. A toxic person disappears. Number toxic relationships. Number mental health. Number narcissism." He had even tagged it with the vocabulary of a therapy goer, twisting concepts of health and maturity to fit his narrative, to paint himself as the victim. He, the man who had called me pathetic, was now lecturing the world on mature communication. The hypocrisy was staggering. I stared at the screenshot, and then I saw the view count and the replies Sophie had also screenshotted. The post had been up for hours. It had 3 likes, one of which was his own mother, and a single public comment from one of his so-called friends. The comment read, "Bro, get help." A laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a deep belly laugh, the kind that brings tears to your eyes. It was the laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. He had stood on his digital soapbox to declare me the villain, and the world had responded with a collective yawn and a suggestion that he seek therapy. His cruelty wasn't frightening anymore. It was just sad. He was a king with no subjects, shouting into a void that refused to echo back. And for the first time in weeks, my laughter wasn't ironic or bitter. It was the sound of me finally and completely being free. If this story touches you, please subscribe to the channel and share the video to help me grow. A month to the day after his first text, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I normally would have ignored it, but something made me look. A message appeared. "It's Caleb. I borrowed a friend's phone. I just need closure. Please. 5 minutes." My immediate instinct was to say no. I owed him nothing. Closure was a gift you give yourself, not something you demand from the person you hurt. I had already found my closure in the quiet strength of my new life. But as I considered it, a different thought emerged. Maybe this wasn't for him. Maybe it was for me. Maybe the final step in this journey was to face him, not as his rock or his shadow, but as myself, and to walk away on my own 2 feet in broad daylight. To prove to myself that his presence no longer had any power over me. Against my better judgment, I typed back, "Okay. Joe's Coffee on 2nd Street. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. I have to be at work by 10:30. It was a neutral location, public and busy, and I gave myself a hard out. This was not an open-ended negotiation. It was a final, brief transaction. The next morning, I took my time getting ready. I didn't dress to impress him or to make a statement. I wore a simple dress that I loved and a pair of sandals. I felt comfortable. I felt like myself. Walking to the coffee shop, I wasn't nervous. The anxiety that used to live in the pit of my stomach whenever I was about to see him was gone. In its place was a calm, steady curiosity. I was simply an observer coming to watch the final scene of a play I was no longer a part of. I saw him before he saw me. He was sitting at a small table outside, and the sight of him gave me a small jolt. The magnetic, confident man I had met was gone. The man in his place looked wrecked. His shoulders were slumped. His face was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He was staring into a cup of coffee, his hands trembling slightly as he held it. He looked smaller, diminished, like a light bulb that had burned out. I walked up to the table and sat down. "Caleb?" He looked up, startled. His eyes were bloodshot. "Maya, you came." He sounded genuinely surprised. "You asked for closure," I said, my voice even. "I didn't order anything." I wasn't staying. He stared at me, his gaze searching my face for something. Anger, sadness, a flicker of the old love. He seemed confused by the serene, detached person sitting across from him. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice cracking. "Why the silence?" You could have yelled. You could have screamed at me. Why just nothing? It was torture. I looked at him, not with pity or with anger, but with a simple, devastating clarity. "Because you called love pathetic?" I said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. It was the cause. And this was the effect. You said my presence was suffocating? I did exactly what you asked. I gave you space. His eyes filled with tears. They welled up and spilled over, tracing paths down his unshaven cheeks. This was the breakdown I had always dreaded. The one that used to make me rush to comfort him, to fix him. Now, I just sat there unmoved. His tears were for himself, not for me. I didn't mean it. He whispered, the same pathetic line from his text. I was insecure. I was stressed about the meeting. My company was failing and I took it out on you. It was easier to push you away than to admit I was scared. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. It was the truth I had always known but had never let myself believe. He hadn't pushed me away because I was too much. He had pushed me away because he was not enough. A year ago, that confession might have saved us. But now it was just information. It was data explaining a system that had already failed. I stood up from the table. His head snapped up, a look of panic on his face. He thought his confession would buy him another chance. Then grow up for yourself, I said, my voice soft but firm. Not for me. And with that, I turned around and walked away. I didn't look back. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't falter. The morning sun was warm on my skin. The sounds of the city, the traffic, the chatter of people, the distant music filled the space his silence used to occupy. I was walking out of our story and into my own, and I had never felt so light. 2 months after I walked away from that coffee shop, my life was unrecognizable in the most beautiful way. The quiet space that my silence had carved out was no longer empty. It was filled with color, with creativity, with laughter. It was filled with me. Austin felt like a new city when I was exploring it for the first time. Not as someone's support system, but as the main character of my own adventure. My little pottery hobby had blossomed into a genuine passion. I spent my weekends at a stall in the South Congress Market, my lopsided bowls and quirky mugs laid out on a colorful blanket. I was always surprised when people would stop, pick up a piece, and smile. When a stranger would hand me cash for something I had created from a lump of mud, it was a thrill unlike any I had ever known. It wasn't about the money. It was about the validation that my ideas, my hands, my work had value all on their own. I filled my life with things I had told myself I was too busy for. I painted big, messy canvases with bright, abstract colors that I hung on my apartment walls. I took a dance class, laughing at my own clumsiness as I learned to salsa. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from, having long dinners where we talked for hours about their lives, their dreams. I wasn't orbiting anyone anymore. I was my own sun. It was at the market that I met Leo Bennett. He wasn't magnetic like Caleb. He was calm. He was an architect. And he had a gentle, thoughtful way about him. He stopped at my stall one Saturday and spent a long time looking at my pottery, his hands carefully tracing the rim of a planter. He didn't try to flatter me. He just asked questions. How did you get this glaze effect? What kind of clay is this? He was genuinely curious. He saw the work, not just the product. He bought a small, imperfect blue bowl. It's for my keys, he said with a warm smile, so I don't lose them anymore. Our first date was just a walk along Ladybird Lake. He listened more than he talked. He asked me about my data analyst job and seemed truly fascinated. He asked about my pottery, and his eyes lit up when I talked about it. When I asked him about being an architect, he spoke about creating spaces for people to live in, to feel safe in. It was a language I understood. The difference between my life with Leo and my life with Caleb was in the small, quiet moments. One evening, I was cooking dinner in my kitchen. With Caleb, this had been a solitary, often thankless task. But as I was chopping vegetables, Leo came and stood beside me not to see when dinner would be ready, but to start washing the dishes I had already used. He didn't ask. He didn't announce it. He just saw a need and quietly met it. It was a simple, seamless act of partnership. It almost made me cry. Another night, I came home from a frustrating day at work and started venting about a difficult project. Caleb would have grown impatient or offered a glib, dismissive solution to make the problem go away. Leo just sat on the couch, listened to every word, and when I was done, he said, "That sounds really hard. I'm sorry you had to deal with that." He didn't try to fix it. He just saw my struggle and validated it. He heard me. There was no control. There were no conditions. There was no anxiety. There was just peace. A simple, comfortable peace that felt more exciting than any of the chaotic highs I had mistaken for passion with Caleb. It was the feeling of being home, not in a place, but in a relationship. It was a life that was finally completely my own. Caleb once texted me that I was clingy. For a long time, that word haunted me. It made me feel ashamed of my own heart, of my capacity for love. I see now how wrong I was. I was devoted, not desperate. Devotion is a generous, open-hearted act of giving. Desperation is a frantic, fearful act of taking. I was never desperate for his love. I was just devoted to a man who was incapable of receiving it. My love wasn't the problem. His inability to value it was. Now, when I do something thoughtful for Leo, like packing him a lunch when I know he has a busy day, he doesn't call it suffocating. He calls me, his voice full of genuine gratitude, and says, "You're the best thing in my life." The right person will never make you apologize for love. They will cherish it. They will see it as the gift it is. The silence I chose was the hardest thing I've ever done. It went against every instinct I had to fix, to soothe, to explain. But it taught me the most important lesson of my life. Sometimes, silence isn't revenge, Revenge is hot and loud, and it's about the other person. It's about wanting them to hurt as much as you do. My silence was never truly about Caleb. It was about me. It wasn't a weapon. It was a sanctuary. It was the quiet, sacred space. I needed to hear my own voice again. It was healing. For years, I had been shouting my love at a man who was determined not to hear it. I made myself smaller, quieter, and more convenient, hoping that if I took up less space, he would finally have room for me. But the truth is, some people will never have room for you. No matter how small you make yourself. He wanted space. So I gave him miles of it. I gave him an entire universe of absence. And in that quiet, in that vast and peaceful emptiness where his life used to be, I finally found myself. And she was more than enough.